Hello there, Mandy here. Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart is not just a podcast. It's also a book, a free online grief group, and a one-on-one private coaching practice. If you are interested in learning more, visit MandyCapehart.com to find out how restorative grief can help you heal heart, mind, body, and spirit. Welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. You are listening to episode 211, titled Grit, Grief, and the Radical Work of Joy with Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald. Sometimes we think joy means pretending everything is fine. But what if joy is actually the raw, rebellious companion that shows up in the middle of your grief, not in place of it? Today on Restorative Grief, I'm talking with researcher and author Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald about her latest book, The Joy Reset. Together, we'll talk about how trauma reshapes our nervous systems, how joy and grief coexist living side by side, and what it means to find hope that isn't shallow or dismissive, but deeply human. Hey everyone, welcome back to Restorative Grief with Mandy Capehart. I am your host, Mandy, and today I am honored to be joined by Dr. MaryCatherine McDonald. She is a researcher, author, and educator who has spent her career studying trauma, grief, and resilience of the human spirit. She's the author of 4 books, and that includes her newest book, The Joy Reset, which is exploring joy not as this fluffy escape from pain, but as a gritty, embodied practice of our healing. Her work drew me in immediately because it bridges neuroscience, psychology, and philosophy, and she brings such a compassionate and grounded approach to the conversations we have about grief, recovery, and wholeness. So, MaryCatherine, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here and talk to you.
Yeah, I think joy is one of those conversations that people who are grieving are afraid to approach. So this is such a
Yeah.
perfect and hopefully very gentle introduction into why it's okay to experience and pursue joy while we're doing the hard
Yes.
inner work.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're totally right. I think that grief, um, we assume that in grief there is no joy, and fair assumption, because often what there is in grief is brutal, howling abyss. And as anyone who has grieved knows, there is joy there. And if you're willing to be open to it, it can transform the process and deepen it, I think.
Yeah, I agree. Mary Catherine, I want to start with this idea of kind of reframing trauma. You've written how society's view of trauma is what's broken, not the people who have lived through it. Can you help explain what that means?
Yeah. So the history of the study of trauma has a really interesting background, and it's been quite, I won't go into all the nitty-gritty details because that's nerding out. But it's been quite episodic. And so we've had these moments where we study trauma and then it falls out of favor and we don't study it at all for 50 years or 100 years. And so as a result, the definition of trauma is something that is still kind of up for debate in the field of psychology. And the cool thing is that the science has discovered that the trauma response is actually a strength response. It's not a sign of weakness or disorder. Now, of course, the trauma response can get kicked on and stuck and stay on and cause symptoms later down the line that do interrupt our lives and do cause pain. But in my opinion, it's critical that we understand that at its base, the trauma response is a strength response, because then we don't stigmatize ourselves for having it. It's something that we are wired to have, and it is there to protect us and help us survive. So, the way that I define trauma accordingly is anytime you've got an unbearable emotional experience that lacks a relational home.
Oh, I love that. I've often told people it's when you have a need that goes unmet over and over again. I love
Mhm.
that concept of the relational home because that really speaks to the fact that we are communal and we need attunement and connection with people in order
Yeah.
to feel seen, known, and loved and heard.
Right. And think about grief in that light, right? Like we live in my opinion, in what is a grief phobic culture, at least in the United States. And so what that means is that even though loss is something that every single one of us is going to have to grapple with, it is very commonly something that you can't find a relational home to go to deal with some of that overwhelm because it's not something that we sanction. It's not something we allow. It's not something we talk about or welcome. It's something you're supposed to do on your own and in private.
And that's such a Western concept too. Isolate
Yeah,
to be better so you can come back and be what we need you to be
exactly.
when we need it. I read something this morning that said, I'm not being mean. I'm just not actively making you more comfortable. And it kind of makes me think of that. I know it's an aside of a comment,
I
but I was just
love it
like,
though.
oh man, imagine if we were allowed to show up and say, I'm not being a Debbie Downer. I'm just not actively making sure you're the comfortable one in the room.
Right.
Learn to tolerate the distress with me, be in community with me. It would completely transform
Mhm.
the way we approach each other when we're
Yeah.
in pain.
And in fact, I think we're so grief phobic, we can't even welcome in the grief joy that
Mm,
comes in. So my parents both died when I was in my early 20s. And so it's been a long time. We don't need to say how many years,
no need.
but I will often bring up my parents in funny ways to tell a funny story or a joyful thing or say, like, what you just did or said reminds me of my dad. And let me tell you this wonderful thing. And people still get freaked out.
Yeah.
And I think that's a testament to how we just are so societally unprepared to handle it.
Yeah. Oh, that makes me think too about your book, The Joy Reset. You have described joy as something sinewy and raw and grounded in the dark. And when I think about grief and this idea that we do have to journey into our own dark night, right? We have
Mhm.
to face down what we're carrying, understand it, ask questions of it, be okay not having answers. But that definition of joy could potentially really shift how we think about what healing work
Mhm.
looks like as we're dealing with grief.
Absolutely. I really think that because of the way that grief and trauma get studied and looked at, we assume that joy is the thing that comes later, right? Like these are tools, the tools in positive psychology and the tools to help you amplify gratitude and imagination in your life exist for people who are basically doing well and wanting to get even better, wanting to thrive. And I think that we need to understand that number one, folks who are in acute grief and acute trauma desperately need those tools as well. And two, joy isn't this thing that is just this like flighty, airy thing that we can only access when everything is wonderful and grand. It's something that's actually really, really tenacious and strong. And it actually is the one thing often that's brave enough to meet you there in the dark. And I think we miss that because we expect joy to show up in a different outfit. You know what I mean?
Joy is the thing that is brave enough to meet us in the dark. Hmm. I think that allows kind of the transition really well into this definition of the thieves of joy that you
Mhm.
describe, that you mapped out in your book too, because we think of a thief as something like so sneaky and so
Yeah.
untrustworthy. And at the same time, it's not that we're asking this light feathered, careful, dainty protector to come in and say, keep joy at, or keep thieves away from our home. We want the beefy, huge
Mhm.
barricade of safety, right? And if we can frame our thoughts around joy is that barricade, oh my gosh, that completely, even my brain is like, how do I even ask a question about that paradigm shift?
I love that. I love the way you just put that. And I wish we had talked before I had got the book out into the world because I would have cited you, of course, but I would
You
have
can have it.
included that. Because I think that that's true. The mistake that we make when we misdefine joy in that way is this like flighty, weak, like luxurious, superfluous thing, is that we don't then leverage its power to be the barrier against the acute darkness that we sometimes unfortunately get plunged into. And I think that I think if people have been through really tough times and they reflect, and it's okay for them to reflect back on those tough times, they will often find these little stories where joy did meet you in the dark. And I think we dismiss them because we don't think that joy is defined that way, or we dismiss them because of some of the joy thieves. So I can go into those if you want, just how they came
Yeah.
about. Okay. So when I really got into the neuroscience of joy, I started getting really excited because I realized that the folks that I was seeing in my practice and working with in groups they were dealing with a lot of trauma, and a lot of the work that we were doing together was really heavy. And so I was like, oh, this is amazing. The neuroscience shows that joy and gratitude can actually rewire your brain. That's not a superfluous, flighty, little airy thing. That's strong and tenacious and important. But then when I started trying to deploy the tools from positive psychology with those clients, they were really resistant. And
Mhm.
so I think resistance is really important. It always has a message for us. And so we have to look into it rather than to, let it push us away. And what I found was that there were six, there are probably more, but I identified in my, handful of years working on this project, that there are six things that tend to get in the way of joy most frequently. And these six things are all adaptations. They are essentially like symptoms of the trauma response that are showing up in a way to protect you against what it deems as dangerous, which is joy. And that may sound counterintuitive, but I think we, when you look at a nervous system that has been wired to fear and is in that hypervigilant space, joy, even though we label it as positive and good externally, is going to show up to that nervous system as really jarring because joy is asking the hypervigilant nervous system to do everything in the opposite mode. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely.
And so these thieves are all sort of different modes of hypervigilance or numbing that show up and get in the way of joy. And I think we can go through all of them if you want, but I think the most important one for grief is actually guilt.
Mhm.
And this is what I had in mind when I was talking about that particular joy thief of guilt, because so often with clients who are dealing with grief, and I've had this in my own experience, when you're in the acute phases of loss, there will be a moment that joy does sort of flicker in. And so often we feel guilt at feeling good that we shut that down completely. And that comes from this belief that if I am grieving a loss, I cannot have joy. I cannot laugh. I cannot enjoy anything. I can't let my nervous system revel in anything. I have to stay in this like sort of acute pain. Um, and in reality, the joy is there as an anchor on your journey.
Yeah, I think often about grief and, or excuse me, guilt and shame as well
Hmm.
in conversation with clients because they don't necessarily identify guilt. They'll
Hmm.
identify
Yeah.
feeling disconnected because, well, we went out to their favorite restaurant, but they weren't
Hmm.
there and
Hmm.
that they couldn't be there. And I felt bad about that.
Yeah.
Or they'll be recounting a story. I got to see this person and I told my friend about it, but they lost that person in their life.
Hmm.
And so I feel
Right.
bad that I'm talking about it. And that cycle of
Hmm.
self flagellation of no, don't you dare start to feel
Yeah.
better. You're grieving. It kind of goes hand in hand with that opposite swing of good vibes only. And well, they would want
Yeah.
you to feel happy. They wouldn't want you sad. They wouldn't want you crying. It's like we've got this, oh, I don't know, cognitive distortion of it has to be one or the other, right? We're
Oh
so
my God.
trapped in
Yes.
this linear, it's one or the other back and forth that we can't even get into that. Well, you described as a beautiful concept, the hope circuit of
Hmm.
a concept that brings us out of like identifying, oh, that we're over embodying guilt or leaning into it instead of finding opportunities to like pathway out of that and towards something
Hmm.
more healing.
Yes, totally. The Hope Circuit is so cool. And this, I think, again, I think if we root these things in our biology, then we are less likely to shame ourselves, because I think these are biological realities. We are not designed to stay in acute grief or pain or trauma. We are designed to toggle back and forth. And so that is what the process typically looks like, is that you toggle back and forth. You have some moments of acute pain, and then you go into kind of a more restful state. And accordingly, all of our functions in our biology are sort of set up that way. So there, if you think of your brain as sort of a circuit board, like a circuit board in an old house, there are circuits that are counterposed, meaning they can't be on at the same time because they take too much energy. So if you've ever lived in an old house, you know that you can't, for example, turn on the air conditioner. If the air conditioner is running, you can't run your hair dryer or a fuse will blow. The same is true in your brain. And I think we've all experienced this and understand it, that when you're in intense fear or pain, you can't really access joy, imagination, gratitude, hope for the future, future planning, anything like that, because you're just in that all-consuming fear. And again, that's completely normal to be there sometimes. The problem is when you get stuck. The cool thing is that researchers realized, I think it was either 2015 or 2016, neuroscientists realized that, okay, we know that fear has a dampening effect on hope. We then learned that hope actually has a dampening effect on fear. It goes the other way as well. And so, what that means is that in these moments of acute pain and grief, we can leverage hope and joy and gratitude. And that will essentially kind of rework all of the circuitry that's going on and can make our nervous systems feel a lot more grounded.
Yeah. That makes me think about individuals. I tend to be someone who loves to challenge a concept no matter what, even if I
Same. Yep.
fully
Love
agree
it.
with it, right?
Yep.
And so I'm listening to you and thinking about my sweet little clients who are like, that's so nice, but what about XYZ?
Hmm.
I'm I'm tired of being told I need to find joy. I'm tired of being told to cheer
Yep.
up, buttercup. And it's not that that's what they're hearing from me. It's what, again, they're hearing from individuals and culture that says we can't tolerate that you're not okay. How
Yep.
do you honor their resist? How do you help them honor their
Yeah.
resistance to it without bypassing? How do we as a culture begin to soften and say, yes, there are ways to access joy and reset
Mhm.
your feeling of a loss of joy while still being present with yourself through the
Mhm.
trauma response?
It's such an important question. And I think that first of all, I think we need to learn how to meet people where they are and take that seriously.
Mm,
And so if someone is in a space where they cannot even entertain joy or the idea or even the word makes them feel nauseous, that's where they are. And that's okay. Doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the person. That's just weird. That's where they are. I also think it's incredibly damaging that we have these messages in society that are very well meaning, but things like, you can't give up hope, right? Because what does that then tell you in your most hopeless moment when you have given up hope, not because you wanted to, but because circumstances stole it from you? That you're now broken and wrong and there's something wrong with you and now you gave up hope. So on top of everything else, now you've screwed up in this way. You've given up hope. The truth is, joy and hope do not require your belief for them to exist.
mm,
You can give up hope. And I don't say that lightly, like go ahead and give up hope and then you're going to feel glee, right? Like there are moments in life and circumstances that strip it from us. And I think we need to take that really seriously because not all of us come out of those alive. And I think that joy and hope meet you in the darkness because I've experienced it and so have my clients. And so I think sometimes when we are brave enough to say, I've totally given up hope, a small amount of time will pass before something enters your world that has a little blast of hope in it or a little blast of joy. So the simple story that I always tell is that my father died really suddenly. There was no run up. So it was completely shocking. And I was really young and he was like my person in the world. And so that loss just tore me apart. And I literally didn't think I was going to survive. I would go to work, cry on the way to work, cry at work, cry in the bathroom, cry in the stairwell, cry on the way home. Like it was just awful. And then I would come home and lie on my floor and just sort of keen and mourn and like really did not think I could survive it. There was no future I could imagine. It was just a black abyss. That was very true at that moment. And every single time I found myself lying on the floor of my apartment, something would filter in that broke up the darkness just a little bit. And sometimes it was like kids on the street. I lived in New York at the time, like hysterically laughing. And you you start to smile
yeah.
because it's like contagious. You can't help it. Like our biology is wired that way. Or like the someone would be cooking food on the floor, on my apartment floor, and I would smell it and be like, oh, that smells so good. I'm so hungry. And you lean into that sort of like joyful feeling of hunger that sometimes pops up. And
Mhm,
it was unavoidable. Like joy was as unavoidable as the pain.
mhm,
And I think because we have a negativity bias in the brain and because our society wants us to grieve alone, it's really hard to see that in the moment. Like you can very easily miss those little things that happen.
mhm,
But what these things showed me And this actually also happened again while I was writing the book. A set of circumstances showed up and I stopped believing in joy. And I almost gave the advance back and was like, I can't write a book about joy because I don't believe in it anymore. And so I took 2 weeks off from writing and like just set the whole thing aside. And then to my horror, because I was very sort of like, okay, I'm just going to let myself free from this project. It's fine. Like, whatever, I'll be okay. If I don't write this book, I can write a different one. Um, and then joy would come in anyway and find me, and hope would filter in and find me. And I was like, God damn it. Like, I gave up on you, you know?
Yeah. Oh
And
my
so I think
gosh.
though that's kind of how I handle that when clients or friends or family members are kind of in that space.
Well, and even listening to your story, I'm imagining my own feeling as how when my mom died and how in the
Hmm.
moment I had a conscious awareness, like observing myself of this is the worst you've ever felt.
Hmm.
Can you imagine if this continued forever? And I would sit and let myself imagine, and Mary Catherine, the despair,
Yeah,
the fear, the anxiety, the drudgery that felt heavy on my body was so visceral. And also visceral was the response I had when you described kids laughing, when you noticed the scent of food.
yeah,
You so cleanly pointed out it is your body using its senses and noticing where it is in the present moment that
exactly.
brings us back into a place of perhaps and
Right.
yet
Right.
maybe.
Right. And maybe for 10, maybe for the 10 more seconds.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like sometimes it's just that. It's not like, oh, okay, well, now I don't need to grieve anymore and I'm good. It's like maybe I can, maybe one more meal.
Yeah. I think those are the moments where we can practice in our own lives so that we can practice with alongside others and let them be
Mhm.
okay for only 2 minutes and let
Yeah.
them have space and even not that it's ours to give, but extend permission to say it is okay to be heartbroken about your situation right now. It is okay to feel like there's no future where
Mhm.
this is any different. It is
Yeah.
okay if
Hmm.
all you can do is smile because you saw a cat outside and then go
Hmm.
right back to sobbing.
Yeah. 100%. And I think two things there. One, I think we need to understand that like the nervous system is doing what it's designed to do. And so when we're grieving, the nervous system isn't doing something wrong, right? When you're crying on the subway and at work and whatever, like that, there is a release there. There's a wisdom that your body has that's not really available to your conscious mind. And so I think, judge ourselves for the intensity of our pain. And instead, I think if we learn to meet each other and ourselves where we are, we could say, okay, so you used to look into the future and you imagined a life for yourself, and now there is blackness. There's just an abyss. What kind of black is it?
Mm.
What does the abyss feel like? Is there anything else in it? And I think that instead of like trying to shut down the emotion, it really opens up this expansiveness of like, okay, I don't know what's here because I've been trying to sort of just ignore it or push it away. Let me think about what kind of black this is. What kind of abyss? Is it swirling? Is it howling? Like, and that's where I think things like poetry and imagery can be really helpful because then you start to feel like you can get to know your way around the darkness that you're living in. And I know I said two things, but I forget oh, and then the other thing is that going back to the nervous system wisdom, like to just leave your grief behind and lean into joy for 24 hours when you're in acute grief is asking your nervous system to do something impossible. It can only handle 2 seconds of joy or something approaching joy or hope. And then it needs to go back to pain, and that's okay. Those moments will be merciful anchors in the journey, and they don't need to be extensive. That's the other thing I think we get wrong about joy is this idea that, like, okay, if I have this really big bad thing, I have to have a really big good thing to sort of counter it. And that's just not how things work. And in fact, your nervous system, and some people have been through this, something really bad is happening, and then something huge and good happens, right? Like my dad died and then my mom died and then I graduated from my master's program. That should be a celebratory moment. That was not a celebratory moment, right? Like that big good thing, that big achievement was not, it just didn't even touch what had happened. And so I think that's another way we kind of misdefine joy.
Really like that permission you are granting to say, actually, instead of avoiding, turn and face what feels
Yeah.
like darkness without expecting answers. I'm thinking we spoke off air a bit about kids and just
Yeah.
realizing there are a vast majority of people who will be listening to the show and who are just in the world who do not understand their own nervous system and the
Mhm.
way the brain is communicating with the body and the emotions are forming, right? So that's often so true of kids. They have no concept of
Oh,
what's
yeah.
happening and they're not quite ready for the cognitive load of understanding neuroscience while they're hurting, right?
Right.
I was trying to explain to my daughter impulse control and how her frontal cortex is underdeveloped. And she's like,
Hmm.
wait, so I'm not responsible? I'm like, dang it, absolutely not. Totally not what I said. Let me
Not the
back this up.
message.
Yeah. Whole, dang it, you're too smart. And now I'm trying to tell you you're also not. Where do I go
Yep.
from here?
Yep.
It made
I'm
me
stuck.
it made me think about how we can give someone permission to glance at possibility
Mhm.
without certainty as a
Mhm.
hard and fast answer at the other side of it. And I'm curious how you would invite a kid or somebody who is working with their
Mhm.
teenager who's depressed and feeling very
Yeah.
bleak about
Mhm.
a future they can't envision. What would you give those kids advice or someone who's working with them for insight about a pathway forward for them?
Yeah, it's so teens are my favorite because they sometimes they are all the joy thieves. Like it's like all the joy thieves are like standing on top of each other in a trench coat. You know what I mean? Like they're
Yeah.
so skeptical, they're so capable, they're so rebellious. Like there's so much energy, and that makes what they're going through sometimes really tricky to engage with because there's a lot of like opposition, which I think is so powerful and important. A bunch of things. One thing I think is to really, really, and this is really hard because when we're adults, we forget what it was like. We can have our memories of what it was like to be in middle school or high school and have these things, but also they're in a different world. And we don't really have the like lived experience memory. We just have the cognitive like story memory. And so I think really meeting them where they are in any capacity that you can, getting into and getting them used to you asking the question, like, what is that like? Right. So, like, what is it like for you to hang out with your friends? What do you love about it? What do you guys do together? Your favorite color is purple. What do you like about purple? Which shades are your favorite? Which shades do you not like? Like, when does that purple turn into blue in a way that you don't like anymore? What kind of music do you listen to? And what do you love about it? Show me the 2 seconds in that makes you have goosebumps. Like, really kind of getting super, super curious about where they're at because it's a double whammy. They feel really connected to and seen, maybe, and then sometimes seen too much, and then they say too many questions.
Mhm.
Stop, and then yeah, I've gotten that many times. But then also you get a ton of information about where their nervous systems are at and what they're searching out for regulation because our nervous systems, before they have any conscious input, are searching for ways to regulate and naturally reaching for things. So I think you can get a lot of info about your teen and your kid from what they're kind of already doing and what they feel about it. And then I think when it comes to a teen who's in a hopeless spot, um, one of the things that I really like to do is try to leverage imagination in an absurd way because absurdity means they don't have to map their life onto it.
Mm.
And this is funny because they will be the most resistant and then the most creative with exercises like this. But I have an exercise called Absurd Hope, which comes from, I adapted it from positive psychology, which will say, like, okay, for 15 minutes a day, imagine your future self. Like, what kind of house do you want to live in? Where do you want to live? For anyone who's dealing with depression or trauma or grief, that future's just been ripped away. And so it's almost like cruel to ask them to do that. But then that leaves us with this thing of like, okay, well, if you did spend 15 minutes, the reason that this exercise works, if you did spend 15 minutes imagining your future, you would be spending 15 minutes in the hope circuit, which by definition turns off the fear circuit. And so the way that I adapted it was, okay, imagine for yourself in as great amount of detail as possible a future that is completely absurd. And so teens will sometimes be like, I don't want to do that. That's ridiculous. Why would I do? And it's like, just
Take me
try. Let's just
seriously. Don't
try.
make me act childlike. How dare
Right.
you? Yeah.
Right. Exactly. Right. Let's just try. Let's just try. Pick an animal. And then, okay, I want to be an elephant. Okay, where are you going to live? I'm going to live in Paris. Okay, what kinds of friends are you going to have? Are they going to be all elephants or are they going to be other animals? And you can kind of take them through this. And what happens is if you do this practice kind of in any kind of regulated way, like once every day or once a week or whatever, as a family, you will notice patterns in the absurd hope that can map back onto your life. And so it's like making this kind of, it's maybe elaborate, but it's necessary, a bridge between, the hope circuit being on, and then how can I activate that in my own life?
Yeah, you made me think of the child that's saying, I want to be this animal that is isolated, that is independent,
Yeah.
that's not reliant. I want to be the king of the jungle versus
Hmm.
I want to be an elephant. I want to be intelligent and
Right.
wise and collective and
Right.
connected and really, really supportive of my people around me.
Hmm.
It's such a window into who they are and what they're lacking and what they really need
Yep.
as
Hmm.
a piece of connection. And I think that you're spot on in saying it feels chaotic and it feels silly and it feels so playful, which is what I love. I'm always pushing people back toward play. I was just thinking
Hmm.
this morning about how, man, kids used to get out of PE with notes. Oh, this kid can't do it. They can't do it. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh my God. And then as an adult, all I want to do is go play. It doesn't matter if
Right.
it's a game. I don't mind if I'm going on the swing and we act like swinging as an adult is this revolutionary act. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's only revolutionary because we denied ourselves when we were little or
Hmm.
thought it was too silly. We were so busy trying to be taken seriously that we
Yeah.
didn't realize we're going to end up grieving this lack of playfulness when we were kids because we can't access it when we need it as adults.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think we divorce ourselves from it.
Yeah.
And part of that is because society tells us that the only way to be valuable is to be serious, and part of it is because society tells us to manage our emotions. You shouldn't feel anything too much, even joy. And so it's like then you kind of cut yourself off from this. One of my favorite activities to do with groups of adults, especially folks who are like really resistant and not going to be leaning into joy. Like I worked for 2 years with previous incarcerated gang members, for example. Like that's a group of folks who's going to be pretty skeptical about someone like me coming into their space and telling them they should imprint joy. Like, right, who go,
Yeah.
expletive yourself, right?
Yeah.
Um, but the thing I would do with them is, okay, go back, let's do a timeline. Go back to when you were like your earliest memories. What gave you the most ridiculous, unabashed joy? And everybody has an answer. It might not be from the same age because we all have different backgrounds and different trauma, stories and whatever. But people will be like, oh man, when I was 5, I had that Power Wheels and I would fly around the neighborhood and I felt like I owned the place. And then it's like, okay, what did that take? Like, take yourself back to that moment. What did that feel like in your body? And they'll be like, oh, there was like energy and I felt like I could do it for hours and I would be out until someone called me home when the streetlights came on and blah blah blah. And so then you can, like you said, like swinging is not a revolutionary activity. If you were on the swings when you felt that joy when you were a kid, there are still swing sets available here in 2025. You can do it again.
Yeah.
And I think that's another way to kind of tap into joy if you feel totally separate from it, is what was the last time you felt it?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
can you
And no
replicate
shame
that?
attached to how long it's been.
Yeah, totally. Right. And if you do the full timeline, like you can see what it was like at 5, what was it like at 10, what was it like at 15, what was it like at 20, what was it like at 25? And then you can also find patterns there, like, oh, it always has to do with freedom or it always has to do with nature.
Yeah.
And that can be another way to access it. All the
Yep.
while understanding that like being separated from it is normal and there's nothing wrong with you.
Yeah. It makes me think of when I first um, kind of connected the dots similarly. I didn't do a joy timeline explicitly, but I remember thinking probably about a decade ago, what is it that makes me feel the most embodied, the most like myself, the
Yeah.
most grounded, the most free of expectations for producing? And it was salt water. It was always coming back
Yeah.
to,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
when I'm sobbing hysterically, I actually feel really free. When I'm at the ocean or swimming in a body of water, I feel really free. Despite,
Mhm.
any latent fear of sharks, I feel really free and safe. And I also learned when I was writing my own book, oh, sweat. When I am working out
Yeah.
or playing really hard, I feel really free, like not restricted, not limited, not even. disconnected from my grief or my losses, but safe enough to tolerate and carry my grief and my losses
Oh,
in
I
those
love
places.
that.
And I don't know, to say salt water is the connecting tissue is kind of a stretch, but at the same time, other than other than that, I don't know what connects those three things, what makes those three experiences feel really joyful for me.
Mhm.
But that's okay. And I think that that's really important too, to say you don't need to have this wonderful essay or dissertation or clean explanation when you're done, like a perfect quote at the end of the
Right.
sentence to say, this is the answer to
Right.
my joy question. It can be nonsensical to everyone but you.
Yep. Totally. And you
Yeah.
don't there, I mean, it doesn't even have to have language. You can just say, the feeling I feel when I'm trail running is the same as the feeling when I'm, whatever, riding in the car with all the windows down and my favorite music on. And that is what I'm looking for. And that's what I want to replicate.
Yeah. You say in your book, listen, joy is coming. Yes, even for you.
Mhm.
What do you hope our listeners are going to carry from this conversation and from that promise?
Oh, that's great. That joy is accessible, that it is a powerful healing force, and that it's okay if you don't believe in it. It's going to come find you.
Mm. MaryCatherine, I love that. And I am going to write on my mirror, joy is coming. Um,
Yes.
Simply because there are, like we were talking earlier, there are moments right now that doesn't feel like that's true. And my husband jokes about uh making a sound of the day because we can't just run around swearing all the time. So
Yes.
little sound effects.
I
And
love
I make
that.
sound effects constantly anyway. So it's like, oops, that one, that's the sound of the day. That's our little like, what are you kidding me? Is this really what's happening? Um,
Oh, that's so funny.
and even that moment can be a joyful
Yeah.
expression. Um,
Yes.
where can people find out more other than buying a copy of your book about your work and the beautiful questions that you're asking for us?
Yes, there's tons of content on Instagram and TikTok. I have the same handle on both. It's just mc.phd. We're doing a tiny little joy every single day of 2025 and maybe 2026. We'll see. On Instagram and TikTok. So you can find me there. And then my website is alchemycoaching.life.
I love it. Well, if you are still listening, and I hope you are, that you should go buy a copy of The Joy Reset because we didn't touch on all six of those thieves of joy. And you need to be able to identify who is coming for you so you can get your bodyguard of joy prepared to recognize what's going to try and take you down because it's okay if you're down. It's okay if
Yep.
you're down. You've
Yep.
got so many opportunities to say like, oh, the view is different from down here. I wonder what that looks like
Yep.
from beneath instead of on top.
Right. Oh, I love that.
Awkward closing because I'm an awkward human. But MaryCatherine, thank you so
Sure.
much for being here with me. I'm just so grateful. This has been thank you for
Absolutely
listening
wonderful.
to episode
Oh, thank you. Thank you for
211
having
of
me. This has been so
Restorative
fun.
Grief. Yeah. If today's conversation stirred something in you, whether it's resistance, curiosity, or even a flicker of joy, I want you to know that is the work beginning. Dr. McDonald reminds us that our resistance isn't failure, it's a form of protection, and it has really important information for us. The practice of noticing what's here and allowing tiny joys to rise alongside our grief is necessary. So if you are ready to explore this more deeply, you can check out the show notes to download the companion workbook we've created for you and keep practicing what feels possible. Because healing isn't about leaving our grief behind. It's about letting joy and hope walk with us, even in the dark. And if this is your first time listening to the podcast, I am so grateful you're here. Please be sure to find MaryCatherine on social media at mc.phd so you can take part in her tiny little joys and share some of your own. There's also, of course, links to snag your own copy of The Joy Reset or to learn more about restorative grief in the show notes. And thank you, as always, to our patrons of the show. I literally could not do this without you. Please remember to subscribe and leave a 5-star review so others can find this work as well. And as always, before we go, one last thing. Please remember, the only solution for grief is to do the work of grieving. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.